For the last year, the loudest conversation about AI has sounded the same. One side screams, it's the future. The other side screams, it's a bubble. The arguments get recycled. The tone gets sharper. And the more you listen, the harder it becomes to think straight. So, let me give you a different frame. AI is not a vibe. It's not a slogan. It's not a single company or a single product. AI is a build, a physical build, an industrial build. The kind of build you can actually measure with power contracts, construction schedules, delivery timelines, and real operational discipline. That's the lens I'm using from here on out. Quick note about who I am, because context matters. I'm NVIDIA certified in AI infrastructure and operations. That does not mean NVIDIA endorses anything I say. They don't. I'm not affiliated with them. And this is not financial advice. Those certifications simply show what I've chosen to study and what I've chosen to work on. The practical side of running AI systems in the real world. I used to talk more about traps, about how people get pulled into narratives, about how easy it is to confuse confidence for truth, the kind of problems that show up at 2 a.m., not in a slide deck. That angle still has value. The market rewards attention, and the internet rewards fear. But fear has a cost. It can turn you into a spectator. It can trap you in reaction mode. And it can make you miss the part that actually matters. The part that actually matters is the build. Here's the big claim I'm going to defend today. The AI build is still early. Not early as in, everything will be easy. Early as in, the foundation work is still happening. Early as in, the real constraints have not been fully solved yet. Early as in, the true scale is still limited by physics, logistics, and operations. That might sound less exciting than pure hype. But if you care about reality, it's actually much more exciting. You don't just need clever software. You need power. You need cooling. You need networking. You need storage. You need reliability. You need people who can run it and fix it when things break. You need supply chains that deliver on time. You need permits. You need grid upgrades. You need 1,000 boring steps that never make it into the thumbnail. That is exactly where we are right now. If AI were already done, you would see the build slow down. You would see less urgency around megawatts. You would see fewer teams being hired and trained. You would see the messy parts getting quiet. Instead, the messy parts are getting louder. The simplest way to understand this moment is to stop asking, is AI real? And start asking, what is actually stopping AI from scaling faster? That question pulls you straight into the real world. Because scaling AI is not about belief. It's about constraints. Let's talk about the constraint stack, the way a practitioner sees it. First, power. Real power. Megawatts. Transmission. Substations. Transformers. You can have the best model and the best hardware, but if you can't deliver stable electricity, nothing runs. Second, cooling. Heat is not just an inconvenience. Heat is a hard limit. It decides how dense you can pack the racks, and density decides cost and scale. Third, networks. AI workloads are nothing like normal office traffic. Small design mistakes become massive problems at this scale. Supply chain and lead times. Transformers, chillers, generators. These things don't appear overnight. Delays compound fast. Fifth, operations. The unglamorous but critical part. Monitoring. Incident response, capacity planning, change control. At real scale, good operations are what separates systems that create value from systems that quietly burn money. If you want the grown-up answer to the AI bubble question, don't argue about feelings. Watch the constraints. Watch where the capital is actually flowing. Watch which teams are building real operational muscle. Now, I want to make this personal for a second. My story is not, I found a secret tip, or I got lucky. My story is that I decided to tie my career to the build itself, not to a narrative, not to a stock chart, to the actual work of making AI run in the real world. That's why I got those certifications, not for the badge, but for the baseline. I wanted to understand the parts that fail first, the parts that scale the worst, and the difference between amateur systems and professional ones. In plain English, I wanted to be useful. And when you've worked around real systems, you learn to respect the people who can keep things running when it actually matters. That builder energy is what I respect. And right now, AI is still very much in the builder phase. This is also why the AI bubble conversation misses the point. A bubble conversation is mostly about price and emotion. It treats the world like a scoreboard, about the fact that transformers are heavy, that permits take time, that grid upgrades don't happen overnight, and that heat doesn't negotiate. When you start thinking in those terms, you stop needing a hero. You stop needing a villain. You start watching the build. And that is where a hopeful story becomes possible, without pretending everything is perfect, because hope is not nothing will go wrong. Hope is, when things go wrong, we know what to check. Hope is knowing which failures are normal growing pains and which failures are structural. Hope is being able to look at a setback and say, that's a constraint. That's a timeline. That's fixable, instead of collapsing into a mood. That mindset is deeply practical. The version that built highways, power grids, factories, and supply chains. A lot of people online talk about AI like it's one thing. It isn't. It's a stack. Models, data, compute, networking, storage, facilities, operations, governance, security. Every layer has its own failure modes. Right now, we are watching the stack harden. We are watching the industry move from experiments to infrastructure. And that transition is always messy. The early internet was messy. The early cloud was messy. The early smartphone era was messy. Every time a technology becomes infrastructure, you get the same pattern. First excitement, then disappointment, then real build-out, then standardization, then the boring years where it quietly becomes normal. We are not in the boring years yet. We are still in the stage where the build is visible and the constraints are loud. That's why I think it's early. And here's the part people don't like hearing. Early does not reward everyone equally. Early rewards execution. It rewards the teams who can build and run things at scale without melting down. It rewards the organizations who treat operations like a craft, not an afterthought. That's another reason I'm careful with narratives. Narratives make it sound like outcomes are automatic. They aren't. You can spend a fortune and still lose time if your design is sloppy. You can have great hardware and still underperform if your network is fragile. So when someone sells you certainty, be skeptical. When someone sells you pure doom, be skeptical. Both are usually selling emotion. I'm interested in selling clarity. Clarity looks like this. AI is becoming an industrial load. That load stresses grids. It stresses cooling systems. It stresses networks. It stresses operations. The organizations that learn to handle those stresses will define what the next phase looks like. That's not a promise of easy money. It's a promise of real work. And if you understand that, you can watch this era with a steadier mind. You can appreciate the scale without worship. You can respect the risk without panic. That's the sweet spot. That's the point of the shift I'm making. Now, I'm going to give you a discipline that cuts through the noise. When you hear a claim about AI, ask, what does this require in the physical world? If someone says AI is going to change everything, ask, how many megawatts does that require? Where do they come from? How long does it take to upgrade the grid? What's the cooling plan? What's the network plan? What's the operational plan? If someone says it's all hype, ask, why are companies still building sites and building teams? What constraints are they trying to solve? This is not a trick. It's a filter. It turns the conversation into something measurable. It also keeps your emotions under control. Here's a simple mental picture. Imagine AI as a factory, a real factory. It consumes electricity, space, cooling capacity, and human labor. If the factory has unstable power, it produces downtime. If the factory can't remove heat, it produces limits. If the factory has a fragile network, it produces idle machines. If the factory has poor operations, it produces chaos. Now, what does optimism look like in that game? Optimism is not a mood. Optimism is not a slogan. Optimism is seeing constraints and seeing progress against them. When grid upgrades accelerate, that's progress. When cooling approaches mature, that's progress. When network designs stabilize, that's progress. Progress is the real optimism. And that is why I think the AI build is still early. Because we're still in the phase where progress against constraints is the main story. We are still in the phase where the industry is laying pipes, building substations. That is not late cycle behavior. That is foundation behavior. The best version of the AI story is not everything will be easy. The best version is we can see the problems and we can see people solving them. Because when you see that, you feel agency. You feel like you can understand the world. You feel like you're not trapped inside a casino. You feel like you're watching an industrial shift where skill, discipline, and execution decide outcomes. That feeling is powerful. It is also honest. And it fits my own path. I decided to make myself part of the build. I decided to train for it. I decided to study it. That's what I mean when I say I bet my career alongside this build. Not tied to one headline. Not tied to one chart. Tied to the work. Now let's get sharper. What does it mean for you if the build is early? It means there will be noise. A lot of it. It means there will be hype cycles inside the bigger cycle. It means the internet will swing between worship and doom. So the discipline is simple. When the conversation gets loud, go back to the constraints. No worship, no doom, just reality. One more point that matters for trust. I'm not going to pretend I have perfect foresight. Nobody does. Anyone who claims they do is selling something. What I can do, and what I will do, is stay grounded in physical constraints and operational reality. That reality changes slower than narratives, and it is much harder to fake. So if you've been feeling pulled in two directions, here it is in plain terms. AI is not finished. The build is still happening. The build is constrained by real-world bottlenecks. Those bottlenecks are visible. The race is about who solves them. That's why it's early, and that's why I'm optimistic. Not because I think risk is gone, because I think the work is real. And if the work is real, the story isn't over. It's getting started.